Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar jointly organized by the SPICE project and the ITS Observatory. It's hosted at Ertico at the moment. We have, as you know, a topic about mobility as a service. I'm going to come back to you later with an introduction to the ITS Observatory, which is hosting the SPICE project and the MaaS Alliance, amongst many other users of the ITS community. But we'd like to start now with our first speaker. It's going to be introduced by Pia from the MaaS Alliance.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pia Karjalainen. I'm also working here at Ertico. I'm currently working with the two different projects. So first one is SPICE, which is also going to be discussed today, and SPICE is about the smart and innovative procurements, and it's EU project funded by Horizon 2020 program. And in SPICE project, we are exploring possibilities how public procurements can be used in order to encourage sustainable urban mobility. And of course, in that context, we are kind of exploring different clusters which are interesting for us, mainly alternatively fueled vehicles, ITS solutions, but also different mobility services. And in terms of development of mobility services, one of the most interesting and topical question for us is at the moment mobility as a service, MaaS. And basically today what we are doing in this webinar, we are studying how, for example, public procurements should or could be used in context of mobility as a service, or how cities can use public procurements to encourage mobility as a service developments. And this first presentation will be given by Sami Sahala from Forum Virium Helsinki.
All right. Just
Can you see my screen?
Not yet, no. Yeah, it's coming now, yeah.
Okay, Sami, now we are ready.
all right. So can you see my screen now, or?
So you would like to use your own screen? I also have the presentation here on my screen, and I can do the clicking.
All right. So you'll be doing a lot of clicking, but let's do it. So let's start. Okay. Good afternoon. Name is Sami Sahala. To get the first things first, Forum Virium Helsinki. That's say an internal non-profit innovation think tank or something like that, part of the city of Helsinki organization. And this presentation, short presentation, is based on what we did in ITS Europe Congress in Strasbourg in June. Click. And then I can't see your screen.
Yeah, sorry. Wait a minute, please.
Or just give me my screen, then this is fine.
Yeah, maybe. Shall I pass it to Sami?
Yeah. Okay, now we now you can share your screen. Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Much better this way. Anyway, all right. I'm hoping you can see some orange screen at the moment. And going forward, so this was based on the presentation that we did in June. Basically, as a Helsinki, we do have a little bit of fame with the MaaS concept, and we're getting a lot of questions about what would be the action steps that what we need to take in order to have MaaS in city X or region Y or a neighborhood Z or so forth. And there's no good answer for that. So trying to look into that a little bit more during this about 10 minutes. So basically, if you're from public sector, what you do first is think of do it yourself, or you just buy it, you procure it. But if you're actually buying something, you really should understand that what you're buying. So we need to take a little step on that first. So here we go. So what is MaaS? There's a challenge with MaaS in that we never actually defined it in detail, as we maybe should have in hindsight. So basically the problem is that more or less everything is MaaS nowadays. So I'm stealing one slide from our next presenter, Jenny. They had a project last year, and this is one good definition of MaaS. And basically all these definitions, they say that it is a way to access and use all kinds of transportation via one service, one user interface. And that's a good definition. Just keep that in mind. Another way to look at it is that this is something I need to stress to all especially public transport people and city people as well. There's the infrastructure, that's the tool for public sector. That's always been there, that always will be there. Then there's the transport layer, which is public transport, private transport. That's something that transports people and goods on top of that infrastructure. But to me, MaaS is an extra layer on top of it. It's a way of accessing all that transport, and that's something that you really need to remember, that MaaS, as I see it, does not compete with transport at all. You should more or less see it as a new extra sales channel on top of the existing work. So another way to look at it, this is something that we've been using lately or for a year now in Finland, to look at the elements, the building blocks that you need to have in place in order to build MaaS in your city. You need to have transport. What you need is a little more innovation, flexibility from them. Then what you need is, and if there's one most critical thing, if there's one thing to do, you need to make sure that there's access to the transport, meaning technical interfaces to get that both to the data as well as to the payment systems, whether it's signal rights, whether it's just identifying the customer, but that's crucial, honestly. That needs to, without that, there is no MaaS actually. Then of that, you need to basically the IT, you need to have what I call back office, different kind of elements in there, whether it's clearing, whether it's something else. And the end user services, which of course get the most fame. That's what everyone recognizes, that you can have different versions of it. It could be a bit more simple way of say looking at the normal journey planner with option to pay right there, all the way to much more comprehensive services that you just go and use it on a monthly fixed price fee. And that's actually what we envisioned first in Finland. So get that over with. How do you go on? How do you procure MaaS? You can't really hear myself even. All right. So one way to look at that how do you procure, where do you put your money in it, is first first option is to look at the framework, kind of create an environment that MaaS needs in order to be able to be built. Another thing is that those building blocks you just saw, just start funding them, especially the ones on the left side. transport, especially the kind of middle part in the back office. Or then you would think that yes, we will be the kind of end user part. We will be the MaaS operator ourselves. All right, it's a strategy question, basically how you look at it, and if you and when you have your strategy in place, how should you go on? I'm not going to go through it, but if you look at all these different aspects in the value chain and think of doing it yourself in public sector, there will just beware, there will be loads and loads of questions that you need to be answering, and that's just, you need to do a lot of homework. That's what I'm saying. Another way to look at it is this one. You may also think that you don't have to do anything at all. That's just fine. If you don't do anything, there will be someone doing it for you. Maybe someone close to, say, Silicon Valley in the US, and they will take care of it. And actually, that's a way that many cities have taken to in terms of journey planning. They don't have their own journey planners. They think of it just fine. Google does it for us, and it's free, and we should be happy with that. That can work as well. The other one is that you think of MaaS as an extension to public transport, and then keep it in a way a closed system from now on as well. Or basically what we've been using as an analogy to telecom sector. There's you separate the layers. There's the transport sector and transport layer, and then there's the MaaS layer, meaning that can resell and repackage all those services in a different way. And there's competition, a free competition in that market. And of course, that's what we've been doing in Finland, but we should keep an open mind and look at all the available options. I'm using a slide from Copenhagen from last spring. They have been scratching their head for quite some time how to move on, what would be the strategy. Their way of looking at the possible tender would be that yes, we will have fully market-driven approach, we will have fully public-driven approach, or we will have a combination of two, basically focusing on the middle part, focusing on the platform, on the technical components in there. And then when you look at those models and the value chain I showed, meaning that then you should put money more on the transport side and ensure that the transport is operating, maybe ensure that there's new kinds of innovative mobility in there, and especially the interfaces. On the tendering model, you put a lot of money in there to become the MaaS operator as such, or the combination model where you invest in the technical components, and then you need to figure out what you do with them. Are you reselling that service as a service for MaaS operators, or is that something that you hand out for free for them? There's another discussion in there. Another way to look at it is what we propose is to not use any of those. Use the money that you are already using in public sector, and that's mostly in terms of subsidies, but it can be different ways of funding and supporting your citizens' mobility, but using it in a different way so that they have the choice, they have the ability to choose the best transport that they need and what they want, and that means using subsidy in a different way quite often, and that will create a market. And when there's a market and there's a demand in the market, there's always supply as well, meaning that all these components on the left will be there. Most of them already exist anyway, but they will come together, they will join, they will provide the end user services that the customer wants if there's more money in that market and there's a big demand. So that's another way of looking at it. That means doesn't actually mean too much procuring at all. So just to check where we are, the three different versions. We have a number of cities who've been basically doing MaaS for quite some years already. I'm using Hanover and Strasbourg as examples. They have been providing, as far as I know, at least car sharing, which is a private operation, access to it via the smart card already. That's kind of a MaaS already. Then there's a number of questions. Does it scale up? Does it scale wide? Can you add 5 more different car sharing companies in there? Can you have 10 different innovative mobility services in there in the next coming years? And another thing is for example, is that there are new directives on the way that actually affect a lot the MaaS provision. There's a question: can public sector even provide kind of the kind of comprehensive MaaS, or are they being forced to stuck with the kind of simple one-ride MaaS services? Another thing is that when you focus on the middle part, the platform side, I'm using Vienna as an example. They have built their own platform, and then the question is, should they make some business out of it or not? Or as a city or public sector, you can also just buy it off the market. There's a number of providers already. Then the question is for example, what is the cost benefit ratio for that investment? If you do it yourself, is it proprietary? Is it open source? That it's kind of so the current trend that whenever public sector is spending money on IT, they should open it as a free for everyone to use, because it's been paid with public money. So here's the quick look at the Vienna model. There's the infrastructure in there. There's the public platform that provides a service for whether it's public MaaS or private MaaS operator. And then third one, which is more going towards more towards the enabler model that I just showed. I think apart from Vienna, I think that the only places where MaaS is truly on its way and have a bit longer experience with it, Finland, Sweden, especially the Ubigo pilot, and now West Midlands is really pushing up with the pilot in there. We all have different tracks and different story how we ended up into that same direction, but we still have made our homework and we still are ending up in that way, and we are still spending money, but we are not buying the transport as such. We are not buying the platform. We are more or less using it enabling way, and basically what we can do is what we think is the best way to use public money is to buy the actual MaaS service and let the market to take care of the components themselves. There's a number of questions in there. Something I just got yesterday in Helsinki, that how can we be in control of the sustainable, but that the people are making sustainable choices, that our transport system is developing in sustainable way. But then the question is that yeah, that's a valid question, but is the answer that you should limit the choices of people? And that's the debate that we are having in many places. How much should we control what people have in front of them, that what they are able to choose from? I'm not talking too much about Finland, because I got this nice picture from Sweden. This is their roadmap. The Ubigo trials, which was an excellent one, they realized that they were not able to combine public transport tickets in it. Then they were doing a feasibility studies, looking at that what would be if they became the MaaS operator. And in Sweden, they found out that actually there are a number of bottlenecks that they can't really be that at all. Then they were thinking of, so then we should procure. They actually did an RFI, went through with that process, and were not that happy with it, as I understand, and then ended up with the decision that, hey, maybe the only way forward is to be open up our interfaces and let third parties do the end user part. So basically resell our tickets, resell our transport service. And different questions on how that is being done, but that's what they are working on quite a lot at the moment. Just to conclude, my message is that there's not just one way to do it. There's something good, something bad in all of these different options. But think twice before just rush into procuring something just because you are from public sector. Another lesson learned is that from some of the recent RFP rounds and procurements that have been made with the MaaS in that title, they actually have been focusing more and putting more emphasis on enhancing the local transport, so that there's more innovation in the transport in that region or city, and then accessing all that different transport is actually a secondary part of that process. So and you don't always have to, it doesn't have to be black and white. You need to either procure it or not. There can be mixed models in there. So keep an open mind, do a little brainstorming. What would be the best model for you? Think of hybrid models, and honestly, there are good work being done on innovative procurement at the moment. So use it as much as you can. And then in the end, if you are committed to do a public sector driven MaaS operator service in the neighborhood, just make sure. I can't see why there would be a reason that it should be a monopoly. It's public transport, fine, there's a number of good reasons that the public transport is a monopoly, but again, MaaS shouldn't be equal to public transport. It's a reselling channel. Why should the reselling of transport service be a monopoly to anyone? So if you're doing a public MaaS operator, make sure there's a private company any private company can do a competing version on next to it. And first of all, as public sector, we have always the tendency to really look at the say efficiency of our operation, and not really look at the user itself, him or herself. That just try to stand on the side of the user, how the users will see your service in the end. And of course, that is the most important thing. I think that's it for my part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sami. It really shows that the MaaS mobility as a service is very different from buying street lighting or traffic control system, and that's why we do have to be innovative. And it's interesting that there are so many different models possible. And I think we need the experience of learning with the help of projects like SPICE, what works, what doesn't work, what meets the needs of all the different actors involved in this potentially very complex but fascinating innovation.
Yeah,
I think there was one question from the floor, I think, and we should maybe just ask you that one if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't stay for the reminder.
No. Right. So the question is from Herr Lindesmath. How can you prevent that certain ways of transport are not artificially made over positive to use in a MaaS platform by a particular provider?
Yep, I get that question quite a lot, actually. Another way of asking that would be, for example, that how can be assured that what choices are being presented to the user are not being affected by, for example, those transport companies sponsoring themselves towards the MaaS operator. Valid questions, honestly. Okay, that comes down to the one of the last points I made, that should it be you as a public sector who decides what options are there for the users? Or should it be for once the user themselves? There's of course the legacy of whatever being public transport, that's basically being decided top down. Somebody decides those bus routes for you. Somebody decides what's being sold on the local journey planner. But when now we are looking at the whole local transport system, and even now it's the public transport elements competing with private transport. There's taxi companies are promoting themselves and so forth. And now for the first time, everything will be in that one user interface. Why should you as a public sector be able to decide that your choice is better than the private choice. You can't do it today even. Why should it be allowed and possible in future in the MaaS user interface? That's what I'm arguing at. Well, I'm not sure if I lost you guys, or I'll just, Paul can't find his mute button. I could go on with that as well.
Okay, well, sorry, Sami, I'll mute you there because you're finished there. Okay, sorry. So, Jenny, we're going to pass the microphone to you and the screen, and Pia has the screen ready. You're going to present some results from the MaaS project on business models for MaaS.
Yes. So, hello, I'm Jenny Eckhart from VTT Technical Research Center of Finland, and I'm going to tell you about business models based on the MaaSify project. Next slide, please. So the MaaSify project was financed by the Conference of European Directors of Road, and it lasted for 2 years and finished this year in May. VTT coordinated the project, and the partners were Austriatech from Austria and Chalmers University of Technology from Sweden. The project, for example, created European MaaS roadmap at 2025, defined MaaS service combinations and operate and business models, defined key performance indicators and performed impact assessment, and analyzed technology for MaaS. The main methods were workshops, both national and international, interviews, in total 30 interviews for different stakeholders in the MaaS ecosystem, surveys, and literature review. The operate and business models that I'm going to present are mainly based on the interviews related to MaaS pilots and services. Next one, please. So here are the MaaS operator models we identified in the project. There are 2 commercial MaaS operator models, reseller and integrator. And for some integrators, MaaS is the main business, and for some, MaaS is a complement to their service offering. Then there is a public transport operator model, where public transport operator acts as MaaS operator, and they can be municipality, city, region-owned or state-owned public transport operators. And finally, we have public-private partnership models. And in the next slides, I will tell you more about these models. So here we have the commercial MaaS operator models. In the reseller model, multiple services from different transport service providers are offered to users via one interface. The integrator model is otherwise similar to the reseller model, but it includes, in addition, a mobile service provider that provides technology and services such as mobile applications, mobile ticket and payment, and multimodal planner and routing. Next, please. The public transport operator is a transport service provider itself, but it also integrates other transport services, for example, taxis, carpooling, car rental, car sharing, and city bikes with public transport. The services that mobile service provider offers could be similar to the integrator model, thus mobile applications, mobile ticketing and payment, etc. The public-private partnership model, in addition to transport service providers and mobile service providers, may include logistics service providers. They might also be statutory social service and healthcare transportation integrated into the MaaS services. These social service transportations are related to disabled and elderly people, for example. And of course, all operator models can include logistics services like the PPP model does, and other additional services. But because the PPP model was developed from the rural area point of view, logistics services are integrated from the beginning due to long distances and free capacity in transportation in rural areas. Other operator models start more likely with mobility of people and might add later logistics and other services. Next one, please. Okay, so in the reseller model, the revenue model can be based on volume discount. Thus, the MaaS operator would purchase large volumes of transport tickets at a volume discount and get a marginal profit by reselling the tickets at normal price. It can also be based on commission, where the transport operators pay to the MaaS operators for reselling their services. But both of these options require high efficiency, and the margin is probably low. And of course, there might be also other alternatives too. The reseller model is similar to travel agencies. The model doesn't give much additional value to the end user, but it integrates different modes of transport on a one-stop shop principle. And due to this travel agency approach, this model has been considered the most suitable for national and international traveling. The integrator model could be considered as the new MaaS service. That's what people often think when talking about MaaS, and especially when MaaS is company's main business. When MaaS is the main business, large volumes are required. The revenue model could probably be based on volume discount or commission, like the reseller model. There might also be additional incomes from other services and products that are integrated, and possibly they could get revenues from advertisements. It has been often asked if customers would be willing to pay higher price for packages or travel chains. And in my opinion, customers might be willing to pay a higher price on a trip sold by a MaaS operator if the operator could guarantee a connection in a case of delay in a multi-modal travel chain, like air traffic does with connection flights at the moment. Or if there would be some other remarkable additional value offered to the end users. And when MaaS is secondary or complementary business, the aim is to support and increase the sale of the primary business. The main business could be, for example, accommodation or entertainment, either events or mobile entertainment services. The integrator model could be suitable for urban, suburban areas, national and international MaaS. Thus, the integrator model could be considered the most versatile and flexible model that can be implemented in various ways. However, as MaaS is a new concept and the future is unknown, when business is relying only on MaaS services, it also has higher risks. Okay, next slide, please. So in the public transport operator model, the aim is to increase sales and the average vehicle occupancy by offering additional transport services and digital services, and this way improve the current business. For example, French railways had an increase in the number of train trips after they had introduced several first and last mile services. The public transport operator model is mainly suitable in and between cities where comprehensive public transport already exists. And then we have the public-private partnership model. And like I previously told, the PPP model is especially suitable for rural areas, which are sparsely populated, where distances are long, there's free capacity in transportation due to low population density and thin material flows. And in rural areas, combining logistics services, school transportation, and statutory social service and healthcare transportation is important for efficiency and maintaining also an appropriate service level. As there are public services integrated, public actors' involvement is needed, and thus public-private partnership could be a good approach, especially in rural areas. So in the PPP model, the aim is not about profits, but to gain cost savings for the public sector by increased efficiency, and also to offer more comprehensive services to residents. Okay, next slide, please. And that was the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Again, like there are many options, it seems, for how to procure MaaS. There seems to be also many different types of business model that can suit individual circumstances and individual business and other commercial and non-commercial interests. we have actually a short poll. So we're going to ask you, the audience, from what you've heard, what you think are the most likely MaaS business models. I hope this pops up now for you. Okay. Yeah, I think that's 90% now. So I think we can stop that now. Right.
Do they want to show the results?
What does it say? Share. Show the poll results. Yes. Okay. Well, there you go. Almost half the respondents thought that an integrator, therefore a new kind of MaaS player, was likely to be the prevalent business model. So I don't know, Jenny, if that surprises you, or is that what you would have expected?
Actually, it doesn't surprise me, because I think this is what is maybe most developed at the moment and most studied are these new kind of MaaS players. So it's really something that is expected and get a lot of finances to develop. And also this PPP is quite high, and I think it's also expected because if we think that we have a lot of rural areas where we need to develop more efficient services, transport services, so this is quite expected. And yeah, but this public transport operator, because there's already quite good cases where this exists, so I'm a little surprised that this got this low, but of course I understand that too.
Okay, thank you then. And thank you very much for that view on business models.
Thank you.
So we pass now to Koenraad Verdijn from PTV, where he's the Director for Solution Management. And PTV is a company getting definitely into the mobility as a service business.
Thank you. You can go straight away to the next slide. I will skip a few slides in the beginning quite quickly because they basically introduce the concept of MaaS. But I want to stand still with this one slide to begin with, because we're coming from a slightly different angle than the other participants. What we mean with MaaS and mobility as a service is a little bit more than just integration of existing transportation modes and a new way of paying for them, because what we see is that people are actually not just wanting to access public transport in a different way, but they are redefining the way that they have a relationship with their vehicle. So everything is connected right now, everything is digital. So people are redefining the investment that they have to do. Click, please. And what people then see is that the values are changing. People are no longer willing to put the investment in a car, 40,000, 50,000 euros, 30,000 euros upfront investment that's having to pay off over the lifetime of the vehicle that you use it. People want to pay for a service when they use it, and only when they use it, and for the service that they need at that time. And people are used to that now in other sectors as well. And entertainment is the first one, where CD sales have gone dramatically down and streaming has gone up. And if you look at yourself, and if there's people in here that have a Spotify account or a Netflix account, just ask yourself, what's the last time you bought a CD or a DVD? It was probably a long time ago, but if you make the sum and think about how much you spend on entertainment, it's probably more than what you did before, even though you don't own anything. You purchase the license right to stream it from whoever owns the music. And somehow people are very happy with that. And we see this new form of mobility being very, very compatible with mobility as a service as it's being defined by the previous speakers. Next slide, please. And as PTV, we've been involved in what we call the disruption of mobility as a service. Yes. And this is a few examples in saying that that is happening now. Just click until you get to the next slide. There's a couple more where we see Mercedes-Benz developing Airbnb for cars. Japan has more electric charging stations than it has petrol stations. BMW's Drive Now is now profitable. And for us, the core is in what we call the Lisbon study, which is a study done with International Transport Forum that looked at not just what are the technological advances in mobility and how will they benefit, but how can organizing it differently, which is what MaaS is all about. How is organizing your public transport system differently going to help the city? And in a nutshell, because you can download this study freely from the International Transport Forum's website, PTV was heavily involved in that. Basically, you only need 5% of the vehicles that are currently running to perform the same trips as before. That means you can eliminate in Lisbon 210 pitches of football fields that are now dedicated to parking, because vehicles are currently only used 50 minutes a day. The rest of the time they are standing still. Next slide, please. And it also has major impacts on accessibility. Left is the accessibility of the city center before and right after, with replacing traffic 100% with shared vehicles. Of course, a utopian scenario, but it does show you what we are able to achieve. Next one. The same expressed in monetary terms. Where can you get with a certain amount of money? Where can you get in a certain time in the Lisbon city center? Next slide, please. And the final result was a combination of strong public transport on the axis connecting the different parts of the city with autonomous taxi bots, auto bots, depending on how many people are in one vehicle. Could have a positive or negative impact depending on how you organize it. Because if you think about it, empty vehicles relocating themselves because they are autonomous can have a very negative impact. But those same vehicles shared among different trips can be a very positive influence. Next slide, please. Because we feel that mobility as a service is not complete until we also include true mobility as a service, which means on-demand transportation. So the best scenario that came out was a on-demand bus with a capacity of 8 to 16 people with 30 minutes advance booking with a pop-up stop no more than 300 meters from your origin or destination and a 10-minute tolerance for boarding time. Next slide, please. And the results are that we only need 5% over the whole day, 5% of the vehicles that are currently running in Lisbon today. Next slide. And that results in 22% less kilometers traveled and 27% less CO emissions, even excluding any technological advances that we might have. Next slide. Now, even the UITP is saying mobility as a service, the on-demand part of mobility as a service, together with mobility as a service as it's defined before as being a new way of buying your public transport tickets, is the future for public transport. A year ago, they would have said this is completely opposite from public transport. Right now, they are saying this is the future of public transport, because what they're seeing is that a swarm of autonomous vehicles, robo-taxis or on-demand shuttles, or how you want to call it, acting as feeder lines to high-capacity public transport lines is beneficial for that public transport, for the accessibility, under the condition that it can be procured under one system, namely as a mobility as a service procurement. Next slide, please. Now, UITP is saying here that integrated is the keyword, which is what we all like to hear, obviously, because only then can they help to meet public policy goals, autonomous vehicles. Next slide, please. But that still remains the question, how do you organize this? And that's where we get to the definition of a public transport, of a MaaS ecosystem. And what we mean with that is that you have basically 3 layers in the whole ecosystem, bringing the public transport or the transport in general facilities to the general public. And there are a whole new range of stakeholders involved. This is borrowed from Transport Systems Catapult, which is an excellent study, by the way. And you basically have the customer is the person, the individual who buys a transportation service. You have the provider who sells the tickets, but you also have the transport operator on the back-end side. So in broad terms, you could distinguish between whoever organizes the transportation services itself, basically who gets the vehicles running. You have the MaaS providers in the middle who bundle all those offerings and have a integrated, either subscription, ticket-based, but one integrated service to the customer. You have the customer who doesn't want to know who he's buying services of. All he wants to know is, I want the ideal mode of transportation for my trip right now, and I'm paying for the trip that I'm doing now. Next slide, please. Now, this is a more elaborate presentation of the same ecosystem. And basically, you go from top to bottom. When a customer has a demand, it goes through the MaaS customer interface into the back office or the API, where it's selected what is the ideal mode of transportation for this customer. Is that an on-demand vehicle bringing them to a public transport stop? Is that fully on-demand? Is that fully public transport? Is it a bicycle? You name it. Once the customer confirms, yes, this is the mode of transportation I would like to take, his payment is processed. And then through an API to the transport operators, the necessary operator is made aware, if necessary, of that request. Specifically with an on-demand system or a taxi service, for instance, you have to have a double communication. Now, there's two ways of organizing this. One is what I call a monolithic ecosystem, where all of this belongs to one player. Typical example is Uber, where the whole ecosystem, from the front-end app in which the traveler makes his inquiry, from the payment engines to the middleware to the actual operations, is owned by one company. That has a few downsides. One of the downsides is that you have no system optimum. To stay with Uber, but I could just as easily talk about Lyft or Grab. They don't care that all the other transportation modes in the system are well used. They care that they make a profit because they are companies, and that's what companies do. There's nothing wrong with that, but it does mean that, for instance, if I'm in Washington and I order, and I've had this happen to me, I order an Uber, and Uber tells me, wait for 10 minutes because the driver is coming from the other side of town, and there's a Lyft vehicle right next to me. Uber is not going to tell me to take Lyft, obviously. But that means that we do not reach a system optimum for the whole city of Washington, because Uber might just as well tell me you need to take public transport because you're standing right next to a metro stop and your metro is coming. Uber doesn't do this. The second way of organizing this is that you split it in three. You have your front end, which is the MaaS customer interface, that travelers, which is the point of contact for travelers to make an inquiry and for purchasing tickets or subscriptions. That's one point. Those could be multiple suppliers. You can have many business models with or without advertisement, different subscription methods, even bundled with other options such as discounts for restaurants, entertainment services, you name it. If they can talk to a standardized API to the centralized system, where the centralized back office system gives them the appropriate mode of transportation for this inquiry and the payment services, then they don't have to be connected to the rest of the system. They just unlock the offering to the customer. The same goes in the back end. A transport operator, if you want to do the whole thing like an Uber, has to be very knowledgeable on IT, has to have deep pockets to start this. But you could also say, no, all I need to do if I want to, for example, as a taxi service, I want to be an on-demand service in a complete MaaS offering. All I need is an API that allows me to communicate my position, that communicates my payment, so my services that I provided, and that's it. That leaves us with the central middleware. And that's where, as PTV, we feel that this should be centralized in the government that is running a MaaS fleet, typically a city or a public transport agency, because that's the only way where you can provide a system optimum for everybody involved. Now, what are some of the benefits and why do we say this is the right way of doing things? Because one question might be, what about letting the market work? Well, letting the market work only works if the market is strong enough, and there's only a few players that can take on the entire ecosystem, build it, manage it, and operate it. That would end you up in basically vendor lock-in, where one or two, Google, Uber, there's not going to be many more than that, run your complete public transport offering or your complete MaaS offering. On the other side, there's plenty of small companies that can have a front-end app. There's plenty of operating services that can be done hooked onto the middleware that are not IT companies that don't need to be. So having a strong centralized system with strong APIs front and back allows for the market to play much more than letting it completely be free. It sounds contradictory in terms, but we are convinced of that. One other unexpected benefit of this is that it will help local economy, because a monolithic system will bring foreign players in, which are the only people that have deep enough pockets to pay for all this. Typical example that I've been discussing with America Latina is local transportation companies that are typically family companies, third generation, fourth generation, 2 or 3 buses. They don't have the means to build an API, an app, payment engines, etc. But if you allow them with a smartphone to simply hook onto an existing platform, that allows for that local business to stay in business, but still offering the same level of service as any other MaaS player, and basically create a level playing field for all the players in the bottom layer, the transport operators. Next slide, please. Next slide, this is what I've already said. Yep, next slide. So basically, the conclusion that I want to draw here is that a disaggregate ecosystem has benefits. Citywide optimization, that's what you're interested in as a public authority, is that the correct mode of transportation is being sold to the user, not the mode of transportation that happens to bring the most cash in for the operator. It's the only system that allows for intermodal trip recommendations. Intermodal meaning that one part of the trip is done with one mode of transportation and you get advice on to change to a public transport and then shared bike, etc., which only works if the middleware is agnostic of the owners of the operators. It decouples technical advances in the transport layer from the organizational aspect. That means you can do this with all the existing technology. You do not need to wait for autonomous vehicles. The reason that Uber is still losing so much money is because it's waiting for autonomous vehicles, so it can cut away its biggest cost, which is the driver. It avoids single vendor lock-in because you do not need to procure an entire system from one vendor. It allows the market to play, so no monopolies, and allows for local economy to play a part at a much smaller scale in which they are comfortable than before. Next slide, please. And that's the MaaS Accelerator program that PTV provides. We can skip this. Next slide. Next slide. I think this is the end of my presentation. If there's any questions, I think I just stayed in time. So if there's any questions, now is the time.
Thank you, Koenraad. You've stayed very well in time and a really interesting presentation. That does complement the other two, because now we're really looking at the inside of how the how this kind of new kind of open marketplace can work, and the advantages and disadvantages of different models. Again, it just points to me that in all 3 of these presentations, we're finding that we are at a point where we're still very much learning what works and what doesn't work, and what the possibilities and opportunities are. So it's a fascinating time and place to be right now. We have a short poll as well following your presentation, a very simple one. Do people think, which way do people think it's going to go? So the aggregate is this kind of monolithic model where one entity tries to own and run the whole business. Disaggregated is the model that you've presented and I think advocated at the end, because it provides the most system optimal and intermodal solution for a city or locality. Or maybe there is some other form of ecosystem, or maybe you're not sure. So the poll is open.
It's a shame I'm not allowed to vote.
I don't think you need to worry. I think we can close that.
Okay, so I've done a good job.
You did a very good job, Conrad. Either they thought like you or they agree with you. So I think that's promising, because that's also, I think, how we see this as the fact that it's a kind of open market. It needs to be an open marketplace. It needs to support commercial, non-commercial interests. It needs to provide the best user benefits, and it needs to be the best overall solution for wherever it is.